Weed, ganja, marijuana, whatever you call it, is likely on its way towards legalization. But while getting people on the side to legalize the drug, it's seemingly easier than ever. A new article from the American Prospect by Robert Kuttner actually argues that when it comes to marijuana, the current status quo is the worst of both worlds. Unregulated weed cornered by capitalists, while medical use is still heavily red taped. Federal drug officials have begun moving towards reclassifying pot as a lower risk drug. At the federal level, marijuana is classified as a Schedule 1 drug on the same level as heroin and MDMA, which means it's a substance of high abuse potential and no accepted medical use. Even with that classification, 38 states have weed legal for medicinal purposes.
But some argue that every little thing is not all right when it comes to marijuana. Increasing amounts of the chemical THC in modern weed is causing alarm as reports of growing psychosis amongst younger users is tied to the drug. The Wall Street Journal released a chart showing that marijuana usage gave a more than 40% chance of developing permanent bipolar disorder or schizophrenia after a drug-induced psychosis episode, to which conservative commentator Sagar Enjeti quipped, "Just a plant, bro."
Here to discuss this article and the future of marijuana in America is the co-founder and co-editor of the American Prospect and professor at Brandeis University's Heller School, Robert Kuttner. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's just Bob.
So why don't you walk us through, rather, the current landscape with marijuana? I think most people are quite shocked that it's on the same level of heroin and MDMA, but given the recent data on how much THC is in marijuana and the quality of the marijuana that's available on the market, what do you make of, the federal laws taking this precaution of keeping it potentially as a Schedule 1 substance?
So here's the problem. Let me try to summarize a complicated situation. As you said, it's still classified Schedule 1. Now, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has just said that based on their study, it really should be Schedule 3, which is the same as other high-powered prescription drugs. However, the Drug Enforcement Administration, which has always fought any kind of marijuana legalization, still insists that it needs to be kept as a Schedule 1 drug. And they actually succeeded in bottling up this report for 5 months, and it took a Freedom of Information request to pry the report loose. So you've got two government agencies at odds with each other. And meanwhile, as you indicated, while marijuana exists in this kind of semi-legal limbo, where it's very easy to get in 38 states, and it's not just for medicinal uses. I mean, pot shops are springing up like weeds. But during this period, the growers have gotten more and more sophisticated at producing pot with a higher and higher level of THC, which really can be dangerous, which ironically lends credence to the kind of reefer madness view that the DEA has always espoused. And so the way to fix this is pretty simple. You have the Food and Drug Administration certify the potency of marijuana and have it be legally for sale, some of it for recreational purposes, some of it for medical purposes. And that way, consumers know what the hell they're getting. That would put marijuana on the same footing as alcohol. But we are a long way from that. And how we get from here to there is going to take a lot of fancy footwork.
How do you prevent, with legalization efforts, the ability of cartels to operate under the guise of being state sanctioned? For example, in Colorado, reporters who have been following the legalization of marijuana there point out that basically the cartels come in, they undercut the state sanctioned weed with lower prices. And so you end up having this weed with higher levels of THC that's also cheaper, which leads to the proliferation of potentially more dangerous substances.
Yeah, that's why you need to regulate it. I mean, you have moonshine liquor, but for the most part, people buy booze at liquor stores or at convenience stores, and the alcohol content of alcoholic drinks is regulated, and you have a lot of problem with alcoholism. But one of the reasons for that is not that you're getting adulterated alcohol or alcohol that's more potent than you think it is. And I think that's a good analogy. And if this were regulated and growers were certified by the government as legitimate growers, and the potency of pot that was on retail sale was certified, then I think there would be less of a market for the stuff that the cartel is peddling, even if it were a little cheaper. And there's no reason for why marijuana can't be very cheap. It's cheap to grow. Retail marijuana should be cheap. And so the cartel probably could not, or the cartels probably could not undercut pricing very much. And I think most users would trade knowledge of the potency and the safety for slightly cheaper street weed.
I think that makes perfect sense to me. I used to live in Los Angeles, and yeah, the marijuana that they have on the market there is much stronger than the stuff we would get in the tri-state area when I was a kid. It's scary when you talk about the kind of psychosis and mental effects. I think many people say breathing on manual. That's what we say on TikTok when you ingest a little bit too much. And it's not
Yep.
so different if you think about it from alcohol. When you think about, young kids getting access to alcohol, drinking way too much, it's poisonous for your body. It's related to all kinds of health, diseases later in life. It's been known to be a carcinogen. And so when I think about the treatment of alcohol being so differently from marijuana, it doesn't make much sense. It does make sense to me, as you're saying, to have a regulation of the potency here. I guess my question would be, do you have any ideas for how we would prevent extremely large corporations from dominating the marijuana market as we've seen with so many other agricultural industries, and that really reducing ultimately the quality as well? We kind of have an opportunity to start from ground zero in some ways with marijuana here. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, two comments. I think that's where antitrust comes in. I mean, we've seen a revival of antitrust enforcement. The government just blocked a proposed merger of Spirit Airlines uh, with JetBlue, and the big platform monopolies, Apple and Google and Microsoft, are under attack by the antitrust authorities. It's not in anybody's interest to have a few corporations roll up the marijuana market. But let me make another point. This is just incredibly ironic. I mean, I'm older than you are, and when I was young, um, and you could get pot on the street, you'd be taking a risk. I mean, there were over 10 million marijuana arrests as late as 10 years ago. And so you were taking a risk that you might go to jail, but people took the risk. But in those years, um, even though it wasn't regulated at all, the kind of weed that you could buy on the street wasn't all that powerful. And we all made fun of the 1936 movie Reefer Madness that portrayed marijuana as a gateway drug to heroin and it would ruin your life. That might have been true of LSD if you took too much, but it certainly wasn't true of marijuana. And we made fun of the narcs who were, obsessed with marijuana. So here we are several decades later, and ironically, the kind of reefer madness people who were worried about uh, pot doing damage to ordinary users have been partly vindicated because the stuff has gotten so potent and nobody is certifying exactly what's in it. And so, if we want to get back to a place where we can legalize it, where people who enjoy it or people who need it for medical purposes can safely use it, this is not rocket science. You just need to regulate the stuff and certify its potency. And the problem is because you've got two different federal agencies at odds with each other, and you got the feds at odds with the states, getting from here to there, even though it's perfectly sensible when we talk about this, is going to be very tricky. It's not going to happen overnight.
If you had to make a guess, which federal agency do you think will win out?
Well, Biden just pardoned a whole bunch of people who were doing prison time for simple possession. And my guess is that Biden is going to side with the FDA. I certainly hope so. And it isn't just the FDA, by the way. The person who finally released the report is the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, who heads the Public Health Service. So he's senior to the FDA and said, yeah, this should be a Schedule III drug. We should regulate it. He didn't go so far as I'm going, as saying we should certify its potency and then regulate its sale. But I think that's where this has to logically lead, unless we want to get into this terrible situation where it's semi-legal, but in this gray area, nobody knows what the potency is, and corporations are taking over.
This makes
All
sense
right,
to me.
thank you so
Policy
much.
in this country going in the direction where it makes sense. You know, it's a rarity. Thank you so much for coming on and breaking this down for us.
Thanks for having me.
We're rising after this.